So a really warm welcome to everybody. This is the first in a series of 6 webinars, online conversations with different grassroots organizations, each in a different continent, actually, all over the world. And the aim of this series is really to internationalize and share the experiences from people in different contexts who are organizing using what we call the solidarity economy, in some kind of way, and we'll talk about that in a moment, what that means. But building up really from the grassroots, so people organizing themselves for a better life and for the freedom of their society. So we have several different interpreters today. I hope that everybody is able to reach the interpretation which they need. Perhaps the interpreters could write in the chat so that people can see in the different languages that interpretation is available and how to access it. Myself and Carly Akuno, who will speak to you today, and other people who speak, will try to remember to speak slowly and to leave spaces between what we're saying for the translators. So yes, I will introduce myself. I'm Jo, and I am a member of the Solidarity Economy Association. We are the ones organizing this along with our friends in the translation commune. So we are a small cooperative based in the UK, and we work on many different projects, including this project, which are really about trying to build up the solidarity economy, which we see as something which is very old. Actually, it's not something new. It's something which is as old as humanity, because, you know, before capitalism and before all of the systems which oppress us, humans have always cooperated with each other and shared and had different ways of collectively organizing, and that's, you know, still the case today. So we want to build up this understanding that this is still happening. It's a way that people have always organized themselves and are doing it today all over the world. So by being more aware of what each other's doing and learning from each other and communicating with each other, then we can share tools and build up our power really as communities, as people, to organize ourselves and look after each other. So I'm Jo, and working for the Solidarity Economy Association, and we have some other members here today. Madge, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Maj. I'm a member of Solidarity Economy Association as well. And yeah, really looking forward to this conversation.
Do we have also Rory? Do you want to introduce yourself? Rory's actually joining us today from a field, so possibly it's not possible to unmute at this moment, but that's okay. So yeah, 3 of us today here are worker members of the Solidarity Economy Association. And we're really excited about this, the first of our 6 conversations. We've only actually advertised 5 of them so far. We have got a 6th group, which is in Latin America, which we will start to promote and announce soon after this event. So that we know how this will go today, the structure is basically that we will ask Carly to introduce the work of Cooperation Jackson, who are organizing in North America, Turtle Island, in the southern part of the United States. How they're organizing themselves, what is their context, why they organize like this. He'll speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have a break. So we need to have more breaks than perhaps in a normal Zoom meeting because of all of the interpretation. So it's a lot of work for the interpreters, and we're going to give breaks because of this, and also to speak slowly. So then we'll have a few questions from us that we will prepare, and then we'll have a short video. So this is another break for the interpreters, and we'll show a video of Cooperation Jackson. This is also really great because it means we can see a little bit more like how they're organizing in their context. And then we'll have questions from everybody. So you can actually write your question at any time as we're going along. And then at the end, in this period from around 5:25, then we'll have about half an hour where we'll ask those questions to Carly, and we'll finish with some announcements. So we'll finish at, well, 2 hours from when we started in whichever time zone you're in. So yeah, let's begin. I'm really excited. So Carly, thanks for joining us. I know that you're also in the middle of a really intense water crisis right now in Jackson, and you're no doubt extremely busy trying to meet the needs of the population. So thanks ever so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We know you've been busy also with lots of other stuff. So maybe you can tell us a bit about what you're doing, why you're doing that, and yeah, the situation that you're organizing in.
Well, first off, thanks for having Cooperation Jackson on. It is a pleasure to be here, with other comrades, other freedom-seeking people. I want to give you all just a little taste, if we can, because I'm actually right in the middle of a distribution event, so folks kind of see a little bit of some of the work, and I don't know if you can see it all, but you see some of our people working, volunteering, they're distributing water and things right now. Hopefully you get a good chance to see, some of what's going on right now, what we're in the midst of. But to start, because I think this water crisis really is an excellent backdrop to why we do what we do. So Cooperation Jackson, just so everyone knows, it's still a relatively young organization. We've been at this in this form since 2014. We started May Day 2014. Which is International Workers' Day. We started on that day very intentionally and deliberately, because in our particular context, we've been trying to bring two different kind of tools in the toolkits of working class self-organization in the US context back together again, right? And so the two kind of dominant tools of self-organization that have existed in the United States, one, which is the predominant one, is organizing primarily in the US context by trades. So this is the union kind of orientation, way of self-organizing. And then there's been cooperatives. And, in the 19th century, as both of these movements started to grow and develop in the United States, they were originally one, right? And what you would often have in the United States is folks who were kind of organizing at the initial kind of point of production. They would usually kind of set up co-ops to service many of their social and reproductive needs. So they would do their own medical insurance. They would do their own like food kind of co-ops, right? They would do their own childcare setups, and all these different things would be co-ops, and they branch off into other areas. But after a particular compromise was struck at one of the high points of kind of like class struggle in the United States during the 1930s, capital struck a deal with some of the leaders of labor in the United States to craft what's called the National Labor Relations Act, which then created the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB. And what they did was it guaranteed in the United States the right of workers to organize and have collective bargaining, to be able to then kind of negotiate and mediate between, capital management and labor. But what it did was set it up so that workers could only primarily work for better wages, better hours, of when they work, better working conditions, and like healthcare. And it really restricted that. And what folks could not do was engage in what we would call in the US context, political strikes and political action. So you couldn't do and you can't in the United States. One, union, say in trucking, is technically not supposed to work in concert to do a strike at the same time as, say, the longshoremen. That is illegal within the context of how the U.S. law is structured. Now, what does this have to do with us, right? So what it has to do with us is the way they set this up, in addition to some of the other what kind of social gains of the period, particularly the development of Social Security and social welfare. It basically kind of eliminated the need to organize some of those initial attachments along a self-organized basis where we control them, because those services were then kind of provided for in one form or another by the state or some state entity. So that really divorced the co-ops from the trade unions, and it limited what both could do in terms of actually exercising real power and struggling for democracy and struggling for the overall kind of transformation of the society. Just kind of limit us to being a special kind of interest group, one of many interest groups within the bourgeois kind of order. So we've been very conscious of and intentional about trying to break that and break it in our context in particular. Because what I'm saying to you, that history, you got to remember, exists in a context of colonization and white supremacy and patriarchy in our context. And all three of those basically kind of got enshrined in our history during that period in the 1930s. So one of the things that wind up happening, for instance, most Black workers did not work at that time in the kind of core industries that were allowed to be unionized. So most Black workers in the 1930s worked in two fields: farming, right, in the agricultural field, and domestic work, right, maids or cooks or servants of that nature. And neither of these were allowed to be unionized and to be entered into the formal relations that were governed by the National Labor Relations Act. Why? Because of race, right? That is where primarily Black, Latino, particularly like Puerto Rican, Chicano, Mexicano workers were situated within how the economy was structured at that time. And so rather than, the movement at that time kind of treating us as equal members within the movement, or even elements that existed within the working class, the core elements of leadership within the trade unions decided to go with that compromise and exclude us. So our history has been very much, no, we are going to deal with the contradiction of race and gender very much explicitly and deliberately in our organizing to kind of correct some of those errors, but to also, I would argue, the biggest error was they gave up the struggle to own and control and to do so democratically the overall means of production, right? Who decides what is produced, when it's produced, and to what end it serves, right? And that's critical and important, I would argue, and we would argue, towards the objective of ending commodified society and commodified relations, which are the bedrock of capitalism, right? So for us, we've been trying to develop a model that gets us out of these forms of relations and this form of kind of production. Now, we exist in a context that offers us kind of some historic benefits, if you would, just given the kind of the recent dynamics. So let me start with the local so folks understand the current. So Jackson, when we started this project, there were roughly about 220,000 people in the city of Jackson. And Jackson is the capital, the political capital of the state of Mississippi. In less than 10 years, the city has shrunk to about between 160,000 people and 180,000 people, somewhere in that range. Now, 80 over 80% of the city is Black, right? It's probably about 85% of the city is Black. 30% of the city officially falls within the federal and state standards of being at or below the poverty line. So it's a deeply impoverished city within the US context. I want folks to understand that, right? 10% of the population is classified as, white, phenotypically white, treated socially as white, which is another critical piece. And then you kind of have like a 5% other, right? Which in our case is largely folks on HB1 visas who come in to work on a kind of a professional basis. They're primarily doctors, nurses, engineers, and it's largely a migrant population that have been brought in from mainly in that case from Asia and Africa. So there's a fair number of Indian, Pakistani, South Korean, Taiwanese, Ghanaian, Nigerian, Kenyan, South African, Egyptian doctors and nurses that come in, and Filipino. I knew of somebody else forgetting, and Filipino nurses in particular, right, who are part of that population that migrates in. And it's a super exploited group. I want folks to understand that. Because of the wage structure here in Mississippi is so low, most Black doctors, and there are plenty who are produced here in Mississippi, because they're US citizens, right? They have the freedom to kind of move within how the US structure is set up. Most folks who are educated here, doctors, lawyers, engineers, etc., they don't stay in Mississippi. We have a massive kind of brain drain and talent drain like every year. So if folks typically with degrees, rather than staying here and earning about 50%, less than what you would make as a doctor, say in New York or California, people migrate there rather than staying here. And so what the corporations do, the medical corporations and all these other, what they do is they make it easier for folks to come in with HB1 visas, but they offer you very depressed wage scales. Well, how most people view, they will come in because it's a way to enter into the US market and to have access to it. But then they strict you with these covenants of saying, before you can move or before you get citizenship, you have to serve us for 5 years or 10 years to work at this hospital or et cetera. So it's very onerous, but that is kind of who the other, kind of 5% is, and very critical to some of the strategy stuff that we're going to talk about, a little bit later. So what that 85% really means to us is a potential leverage of political power. That's why that number is so important. Because what we've been working to say is that we should be able to turn this kind of historic, socially constructed group with this similar culture, context, background, and positioning in society, leverage that to exercise Black power, Black political power. And we've done that in a couple of different ways, right? Within our model and the strategy that we developed and put out some years ago now, called the Jackson-Kush Plan. And this was based upon us exercising power in a couple of different ways. The chief and most fundamental way that we were advocating for is autonomous, independent power aiming towards a dual power kind of status and orientation. And that is self-governance through people's assemblies, like on a mass scale. The other component was democratizing the economy. That's the component that Cooperation Jackson was explicitly built to work on and develop. And so there we're following an old adage of our movement, which says, political power without economic power is symbol without substance, right? And within the capitalist framework, if you don't really have any economic power, you really don't have much power. And so we've been trying to leverage, like, how do we build an economic base, but one that we control, that is subjected to democratic mechanisms, democratic control by the members of the community, by the people who live there, not lives in New York or Chicago or someplace else where all the stock markets and brokers, but no, people who live here, who have a direct say and an interest in what takes place here. And then the other form has been, trying to leverage some members of our activist community in particular to run for elected office. And we've done that, and we've had several kind of victories, if you want to, kind of call them that, with being able to get some people elected to different offices. Probably the most noted, that people look up us in our history in Jackson, they will point to that we've gotten 2 mayors elected, Chokwe Lumumba and his son, Chokwe Antar Lumumba, who is currently the mayor now, and going through this particular water crisis. And so, these kind of 3 components were designed to work in conjunction with each other and to hold each other kind of accountable for when one kind of gets out the other, or out of order, or deviates from, kind of agreed upon principles of struggle around striving for, Black self-determination, striving to democratize the economy within our current kind of framework, and to hold each other in kind of like a little check and balance. It hasn't exactly worked that way, but again, it's still a young project with a lot of experimentation, a lot of things we've done right, and more things that we've done wrong along the path. But the issue is not to fear making mistakes, but to learn from the mistakes. That's the most critical thing. I would say that, and be honest about the mistakes, right? Like, following what Amilcar Cabral says, don't hide, anything from the masses of the people, tell no lies, and claim no easy victories. With that orientation is one that we've been trying to uphold. Now, I mentioned that we're roughly about 8 years old, and in that time, what we've been able to kind of accomplish, the kind of the bedrock of what we do in many respects is our community land trust, right? The Fannie Lou Hamer Community Land Trust. And we have 44 properties, including, this plaza that I'm presently sitting in, this grocery store. This is the largest individual piece, and we own basically an entire block of kind of commercial space and commercial building. The space I'm situated in now it was once a grocery store, and we're developing it to be a grocery store. It was on schedule to open actually in 2020, and then something happened. The pandemic totally interrupted that process, and it's taken some time to kind of build another team. Some of the folks who were working on that, because it didn't open, they had to kind of seek a livelihood elsewhere. So a couple of critical people, particularly had some of the management skills around operating a grocery store, they've had to move on to just make a living. So we're kind of redeveloping the skill, and that takes some time. But it's the Community Land Trust. And then we have a network of federated cooperatives, which have been designed very intentionally to kind of work kind of hand in glove in the construction of our own ecosystem, very intentionally and deliberately, because what we're trying to do in many respects is be able to withstand the pressures of the capitalist market, particularly in our context. The largest employer, so folks understand, by far and away, the largest single employer in the state of Mississippi is Walmart, which gives you a sense of the economy. But Walmart is a very vicious corporation, right? And they don't want any form of kind of competition to be able to breathe and move and strive. And why the Community Land Trust is a bedrock is, we own it. It's it's collectively owned. It's not individually owned. None of this is individually owned, right? It is owned by the entity that's kind of serving the community. And there's very limited ways that you can have collective kind of property in the United States. And this form is not perfect, but it's the one within the frame of the existing bourgeois law gives us the most kind of leverage, right? There's other ways we would like to do it, but then it puts us at risk in some other ways. So we're trying to work within it, but then exceed its limitations through internal, like democratic operating principles and practices. But where this gives us kind of the ultimate amount of leverage is that, you know, if we didn't own this space and we own it outright, there is no, we don't have any loans on it or anything like that. So we're not paying a bank, right? The bank doesn't, like, we own it. And that's a strategy that we've intentionally, deliberately have done, which has had the strengths and weakness in the US context. But every single property that is under our stewardship, we own, and we own outright. And that we've done that by saving up money to be able to just buy outright, right? Rather than going to a bank and like offering a loan. And we part of the thing to understand about our strategy is that we don't trust banks. And banks have been very racist institutions, particularly here. And they if they give us a loan, it's offering under some of the worst terms imaginable, right? 10 and 15% interest they want to charge, which means you'll be basically paying them forever. And before, you know, you spend, like, for something like this, if we would have took out a loan, you know, we'd probably be paying just the interest on it for about 10 to 15 years before we would pay down anything on the principal. And, you know, asking a bunch of, you know, very poor Black folks to take out a loan and then be in debt is a trap. And it's one that we've been trying to avoid, and so far have done a decent job, right? You know, we're challenged a bit to kind of raise sometimes the capital to improve some of the spaces that we have. So it's not without its challenges. And then the bank's trying to punish us on that, you know, because it's easy to say, oh, let me come to you and borrow $50,000, which I know I can pay back in a year or two, you know, from the profits we get from our kind of our operations. But they're like, no, you know, because you don't have a credit history, or you don't have X, Y, and Z. But anyway, our strategy is we own these properties, we own them outright. The only thing that we have to do is pay the taxes. And since our community land trust is technically a nonprofit, we could actually structure it in such a way that we would pay minimal tax, but we think and have made a commitment to pay the taxes, particularly because Jackson has a declining tax base, and we want to have certain services in our community rather than be taken out. So we're not trying to dodge that responsibility, but like, if this is going directly to our community, this is an investment in us, right, and in our future, so we want to deal with that. And we can talk about why that's important to us and why we've made that decision, which may seem like a contradiction, but how we kind of are trying to move with that. But having this ownership gives us a tremendous amount of flexibility. So if we didn't own this and we were trying to start a grocery store in this, like, we would have had to probably open under the crazy conditions of the pandemic, right? Because it would have been life or death, you know, for those particular members, and they wouldn't have any kind of security blanket to like experiment or to even fail, right? Like, we've had a couple of co-ops that have just failed outright. But, you know, we can reorganize because, look, we own the space. So if that doesn't work, find a way to reorganize, find something that will actually, you know, and allow you to be sustainable in terms of earning an income and regroup around that. So, you know, us owning has given us a tremendous amount of protection and flexibility and time and space for us to grow, learn in a way that we were totally dependent upon, like paying market rate rents. You know, most of our things would not have developed, particularly in the way that they developed, where there are political principles at the core of what we're trying to do that are working towards a broader commitment towards that decommodified goal and objective, and trying to produce as much as possible to serve community need rather than kind of a market need, right? We have to do a little bit of both at this stage, but increasingly we'll be able to do almost much community kind of production as we're doing market production. And that's very critical, you know, for us, particularly in a moment like this, where there's kind of this deep and profound crisis. So the co-ops that exist, that are operating with some challenges right now, there's the Green Team, which is, you know, a landscaping cooperative. and it was doing compost, but we have another group that's now going to take that on a larger scale. There's Freedom Farms. That's the one that's being hit the hardest by this water crisis, because our water is basically kind of untreated. They haven't been able to irrigate the crops for about a month. So some things are doing okay, some things are withering, in many respects, and not be able to kind of go to market. So they're going to have a hard summer, piece, and probably operate at a loss over the summer. And we now have to figure out a way that they cannot be dependent in any form or fashion on the water system, and its need to be treated in certain different ways. So that's a piece that we're beginning to take on. And then we have a small manufacturing co-op, that's the Community Production Co-op. And that one is based primarily on digital fabrication kind of technologies, precision cutting, 3D printing, electrical kind of craft work and design work. And within that also, there's a print shop, right? Where we make t-shirts. The one I'm on is one that where I'm wearing is one that we made. And it makes like banners and things of that nature, right? So that's another kind of division of that particular co-op. And then in terms of what's developing and coming down the pipeline, there's Zero Waste Jackson, which is a recycling and composting co-op. There's the People's Groceries, where I'm sitting in now. And I'm forgetting one. People will hurt me if they hurt me. It'll come back to me, you all. But that's that's where we're at now. Like I said, we've started a few other things that have not worked, not succeeded. We had a composting and recycling co-op some years ago, so this is kind of a reiteration of that. That one failed primarily because we attached ourselves too much to the city system, and then the city decided that it was going to just give up doing recycling altogether. And so kind of we had a partnership piece that was working with them, and then once they kind of pulled the plug on that, it just kind of removed us from the equation. And why that was critical for us was that we were kind of doing the operations. They had the storage facility. When they shut everything down, we didn't have a facility large enough to collect that much cardboard and plastic, right? It was just impossible at the time where we were at and what we owned to be able to do that. So that one kind of basically just kind of collapsed. And the same thing also with the kind of the composting side of that is that they set up some laws which has made it rather tough to do composting, at least on a large, quote unquote, industrial scale within the city limits, outside of certain zones. And so that was also kind of a structural impediment. But we moved that out so that there's now areas outside of Jackson that we don't. Oh, I remember what the last one was. And that's medicinal cannabis has just become legal in the state of Mississippi. And so we're doing a cannabis co-op. And the piece for us, so folks understand, is we're less interested in the cannabis itself than we are with the hemp that we could allow to do on the back end of that with how the licenses are structured. And the critical piece for us around the hemp is that we want to grow hemp and bamboo on a local scale to use these as primary building materials, sustainable building materials for some of our larger goals and vision, particularly for the Community Land Trust and for the CPC. So one of the things that we want to do with the Community Production Co-op down the road is be able to build construction, to construct houses using this technology and technique. And we want to do it with locally resourced materials. Trying to set up a model to show you can do this profoundly different and you can live profoundly different. We can change our overall standard of living and how much it costs to build a house, how we can go off the grid. We've got some small demonstration projects, but that's the larger kind of strategic piece of what we're looking for, with the kind of medical cannabis that's largely probably going to open up to recreational cannabis, and which is already being very much dominated by large corporations in the United States. Don't let nobody tell you otherwise. And not, you know, and it's still not dealing with equity. So like here in Mississippi, for instance, there are thousands of people, Black people in particular, who've been arrested over like the past 30 or 40 years, who are doing major time for selling weed, for selling cannabis, you know, like in the community. They've legalized this, but they're not allowing anybody out of prison, right, for distribution. But meanwhile, you got companies like Walmart through a shadow company is the largest investor in the cannabis industry in Mississippi, right? And so you got them coming in, start setting up these major dispensaries, totally undermining the kind of local economy of folks who are dependent upon that in many ways to kind of survive. Totally, so you're destroying one kind of economy that people can kind of own and control, despite what you might think about it morally. And then once that's destroyed, you still have thousands of people who were criminalized for this before, who are going to remain in prison, and let the folks who created the law that penalizes, now they profit from opening this business up in a way that they can control it and monopolize it. So this is some of the things to set a context of what we're fighting against and why we try to set up this interrelated network. Because we're trying to insulate and protect and create our own infrastructure, because ultimately we believe that to really democratize the economy, we have to create our own value chains and our own supply chains, which operate along our principles, our values, and the same goals and objectives of trying to break down some of the core aspects of how the capitalist market and how capitalist logic functions. So that's why we've been very intentional around creating things that kind of fit together, which is profoundly different. I want folks to understand it's profoundly different than how most co-ops are constructed in the United States. Most co-ops in the United States are constructed on what we call like a friend and favors orientation. That's our own word for it. And what that means, not to deride it, but it's like you get 10 people or 5 people who like making clothes, right? And it's their passion, their hobby, and they want to take that and make an income off of it. Okay, that's great, right? We don't have no problem with that. The issue is for us, we've chose not to go that route because it's like in our community, given the level of poverty that exists, given how food and water has historically been used as weapons, we've tried to focus on what are the things that are going to enable us to have the maximum amount of independence from being tied into their kind of market structure and their reality, and give us the political leverage to make the moves that we want to make for our own community that give us the maximum amount of strength. So we've made assessments, political assessments. Hey, we're going to focus on food production, even in an urban environment, because we don't want food to be used as a weapon as it was against us during Hurricane Katrina. We lived through that 17 years ago. We have vivid memories of, how they held resources back to force people to leave New Orleans and to force people to leave Gulfport, right? So they could then take those properties, gentrify them, tear down public housing. So we are very clear about food being used as a weapon. And so we were like, no, we're not going to allow them to do that to us to the greatest extent possible. So how do we contravene that? We create a food co-op, right? And we create our own productive cycle with the farm. We started with the farm first, and now we're going, as that's kind of grown and mature, going to the next stage of developing the grocery store. So we create our own kind of network of autonomy and independence. And if we have our own values and supply chains, we control whatever kind of, to a certain extent, not completely, but we have more control over like the price points, right, of what it costs to produce something, what forms of compensation can be rendered outside of finance. We can do barter and trade. So it takes us out of certain kind of relationships. And that's what we've been very intentional in terms of trying to create here at Cooperation Jackson. Again, it's not without its challenges. A lot of things we try more things that don't work than we try things that do work. And we want to encourage folks that if you're new to like trying to explore the solidarity economy, get used to that, right? That's a dynamic that we have to kind of learn and adjust, particularly if we're trying to use this, you know, to as an anti-capitalist tool to subvert capitalist development and capitalist logic. So I'll end there, just in the interest of time and opening up the questions. Hopefully that wasn't too fast for the translators or too long. I tried to be slow, but also to cram up a bunch of things in there. So thank you all.
Thanks so much, Carly. So we're going to have a 10-minute break right now. We're going to have a 10-minute break, and then we will come back and do some questions. So see you all at, yeah, in 10 minutes. There are too many time zones to say the time. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So we've had a kind of introduction to, yeah, the context that the folks at Cooperation Jackson are organizing in, how they're organizing, some of the different ways, vehicles, methodologies. So we have a few questions that I'd like to start off with, and then I can see also lots of people are putting messages in the chat with some questions as well. So we're picking those up. We're keeping a note of those for afterwards. Is my signal okay? Okay, cool. So yeah, I wondered if you could expand on a little bit what you guys mean when you talk about the solidarity economy, because as I understand, this is like one of your kind of 3 main lines of strategy. And then shall I tell you the questions now, maybe all together, and then you can better, or do you want one at
like 3 at one time, maybe. No
3 at one time?
Yeah.
Well, I've only got 4.
Okay, well, give me 2 then. We can do 1,
cool,
2, and
okay.
then another 2.
Yeah, solidarity economy, like why this strategy, like what does it also mean to you? And then the other one was what advice would you give to folks kind of starting out on this kind of journey, like, you know, people facing marginalization, oppression, poor, working class, Black folks, you know, migrants, whatever it is, like how would you advise people to begin on their journey?
Well, thank everybody for the questions. In terms of like definition, let me paint a picture of what we're striving against. So one of the things that's highly promoted and been highly promoted in the Black community, you know, particularly the last 50 years, is entrepreneurship, right? And the solution to our political problems and economic problems and social problems is more entrepreneurship. What they mean by that is individual ownership and individual proprietorship. And what you have with individual ownership is a continuation of unequal relationships between, you know, kind of say those who think and then those who labor. But there's no, in order for any business to function, somebody's going to have to do some labor. I mean, even if it's just typing on the keyboard, that's still labor, right? It's still your time, still your energy, right? And if somebody is employing you to do that, they are controlling aspects of your labor, your time, your mind, your creativity, right, and your energy. And so we're not into this notion that we're going to solve a historic collective problem by doing all of this individual promotion of creating a whole bunch of little bitty bosses. And like that's going to be the solution to a collective problem. Like there is no individual solution to a collective problem. Right now, that doesn't mean that there aren't individualized dynamics and issues and things that have to be resolved for person to person or trying to remove people's individuality. But we make a distinction between individuality, of which we're trying to uplift, preserve, uphold, and individualism. Like we're against the individualism, which says that, you know, you only work for the benefit of yourself, right? And you only do things in a course to only your own needs without taking into account the needs of those who are in your community, those in some relationship with you. And so the antidote, we believe, or at least one of the antidotes to this individualism, which is so deeply ingrained and promoted in US culture and capitalism in general, is solidarity, right? Like throughout most of history, we would argue, humans have gotten to the point that we've gotten not from over competing with each other, but from actually collaborating with each other. Like if there weren't certain forms of collaboration, particularly early in our history, the elements in the creatures which have better claws and better fangs and things of that nature probably would have done us in. But it was us working together for some common aims and objectives that enable us to survive, enable us to learn how to use these remarkable tools we call hands with these opposable thumbs to do all these wonderful things, and to pass the knowledge on of like, hey, I just figured out how to do this. Let me teach it to you so you can teach it to somebody else. This collaboration, this cooperation, this solidarity, which I would argue has been the bedrock of our survival in the long term. So we want to enhance that. And you enhance that by being in solidarity. And we mean solidarity. For us, there's a condition that we also want to, challenge. Being in alignment and being in practice with folks who are not your blood or your kin or your clan, but are part of the larger, like the community of which you are a part of, right? Because there are ways in which oftentimes you create small kind of kin groups that will do well in protecting others, but then that becomes a doing well at the expense of somebody else, right? And we were like, no, look, we all live on a very small planet with finite resources, and we can either, tear ourselves down, which is the path that capitalism is promoting, a path towards, basic extinction of our species if it keeps going in the way it's going, or we can take, the gift that, we're still trying to use of these big brains that allegedly can think and process and rationalize, take that and turn it into a collective tool, where we can do levels of coordination and planning that works within the limits of the environment, the limits of the earth, and not try to exceed those, or just use the earth as just like just something that we can constantly draw from without paying any consequences, or even deeper still, like this belief that we actually own things, like we own land. I want you to all sit back and think of how kind of crazy that is, right? Like how you own something that was here long before you ever were even a notion. Like how is that possible? Right? And then what gives us or you or anybody kind of the right to say only I could use what's here and nobody else? Right? When it was there before you, it's going to be there long after you, or even a thought or a memory in anybody's mind or imagination. So, we overcome some of these, we have to start overcoming some of these dynamics through the practice of solidarity, being in step with each other, being in dialogue with each other, developing common interests, even when and where we don't. We have a lot in common already, as Black people, as working class people, and to uplift those and to highlight those and to use those as a means to try to seize control of our labor, our time, our energy, and not allow others who don't have our interests in mind or at heart to then dictate to us what we can do with our time, mind, and energy, which they've been doing now for the past couple of centuries at the very least, and not working in our benefit. So solidarity is the key, and trying to develop a set of productive relationships where we are dependent upon each other, very consciously and deliberately, in building that up. That's the core for us of where we want to start. And it's a piece in many respects in the Black community in Mississippi, just to be clear. It's kind of a returning to what enabled our ancestors to survive in the first place, right? So it's not like it's particularly new. It's like actually returning back and countering the propaganda of just like this entrepreneurship, like we're going to survive because of entrepreneurship. We're going to do like, no, we didn't survive because there were hundreds of Black businesses. We survived because we shared with each other, and we cared for each other, and we protected each other. You know, when the Klan showed up, or when the Citizens Council showed up, the Night Riders showed up, we, you know, and if that meant like fighting back, we fought back. If it meant getting somebody out of Dodge, we got them out of Dodge, right? You know, so that's the basis of it for us. In terms of like getting started, you know, you start with what you have first and foremost. And I think sometimes, you know, we've been taught and socialized to think of everything in terms of like these deficits, right? Like I don't have money, so I can't do X, Y, and Z, right? I don't have this kind of tool, so I can't do X, Y, and Z. And this is the piece, like how we've been trying to counter this in our own community. So our community doesn't have a lot of money. It doesn't have a lot of people employed, but we try to flip the script on that. Okay, so if you don't have money and you don't have a job, that means you got a lot of time, right? Potentially, you got a lot of time, right? And if we pull our time and energy together, and with the little resources we have, we can maybe buy some tools, right? And collectively share those tools and come up with a time management system. Okay, you need it at this time, I need it at this time. And we're gonna, you know, we're gonna place it here so we both have access to it, and then we'd be responsible for, hey, I'm gonna make sure I leave it in the condition that I found it and give it back to you so that you can use it, you know, for the time that you need it. We can do those things collectively, right? And we've done that kind of stuff, you know, historically. And what I mean to be practical, you know, oftentimes in a lot of small, you know, villages and plantations, you know, where my ancestors were working and laboring at, there might have been one horse in the whole entire little, you know, like rural area in the township. And people had their own little plots to farm, and then they worked on larger farms, right? But for the ones that they were working on by themselves, that they owned and controlled, how do you, you know, everybody doesn't want to do back-breaking work. So how do we use that one horse, right? And you know, put its labor and its use around for everybody to use. And people did that. That's how they survived, right? You know, because you weren't getting anything from the white landlords who dominated everything. We survived because we shared. We would survive because we were in solidarity with each other. And that's where you really kind of have to start. First, just do an assessment of, you know, what you have and what it could be used for, not like what you don't have. Don't start with a deficit. Start with the positive in your thinking, like, I have this and I can do X, Y, and Z with it. Then you can think about how to add on to it, but start to think about, how do I add on to it by adding more capacity of another human being, first and foremost, to the equation if you want to do anything cooperative, not starting by thinking about, well, how do I take this idea and immediately monetize it? Like if you do that, you're actually going to cut yourself short, right? Particularly if you're starting like in a poor community like mine or some conditions like that. The first thing is, who could I work with, right? And how can I work with them? How can we work together to build something up? How do we want to make decisions democratically about our time and our energy? You know, those are the first real steps that I would advise any and everybody who's considering, you know, kind of following a path like this. Those are the first concrete steps I would advise you to take.
Thank you for that. So the other, we have like 5 minutes before we need to put on the video. So I would ask you to talk about the water crisis, actually, like the current situation that you're currently facing. I imagine you have some kind of like huge mutual aid effort type thing going on to meet the gap in what the state is not providing. So yeah, maybe you could tell us a bit about how that's going, also how people can support.
Right. Well, so there's no portable drinking water that you can get from any tap or any faucet in the city, right? Water pressure has been restored, which means like you can, if you have a toilet, you can flush it, right? And so that's the benefit from where we were at, say like a week ago, where you couldn't flush it, right? And the sanitary system just was not functioning at all. And then, myself and many other people who worked in, done solidarity, mutual aid efforts and relief work in many different environments, I was very concerned about that kind of sitting or being around too long. And then a whole series of airborne and insect-borne diseases might crop up, of which there are already a good number in our region. This is a very hot, humid, semi-tropical region where, malaria is coming back, dengue fever is coming back. These are things they thought they eradicated, in the industrialized West some time ago. Sleeping sickness, encephalitis, all that stuff is coming back. And then down here, we have some particular very vicious brain-eating microbes that come from untreated water, and flesh-eating microbes that has been getting worse and worse, over the past 10 years. There's always, in Mississippi, there's always at least, like the past 5 years, there's at least 10 people who die from the brain-eating one almost every year, and it typically comes from folks swimming in like a stream or a river where there's spill off from untreated water that folks aren't aware of, and they pick up this parasite because it's eating off of the I think in particular it likes phosphorus and calcium that it eats in particular, which comes from a lot of fecal and urine waste to give it a natural environment. So we've been dealing with trying to deal with that. So the toilet's working again helps to kind of dissipate that. But in order to find bottled water that you can buy, last week you would have to go about 20 miles outside of the city to find a store that had water that you could buy. It was just all bought up. Right now, if you get to a grocery store, like early in the morning, most of them open at like 7 o'clock. If you get there from like 7 to 10, you can kind of buy water, then it typically runs out, right? But that makes it dependent upon, having resources to buy water. And remember, I told you how poor this city is. Most folks don't have enough money to buy like 25 gallons of water every day, which is on typical what somebody in our area uses for drinking and for bathing and for cooking. And there aren't 25 gallons of water to buy anyway, right? They limit you to buying like 2 or 3. So, you kind of have to deal with that. So, we're doing water distributions as often as we can. We're now in a dynamic where we are going to buy water where we're getting our supply from is about 50 miles away, fairly consistently. And some of our, we're just repurposing some of our green team and Freedom Farm trucks to go pick that up. We're also renting like U-Haul, which is a rental company if folks aren't, big rental company in the United States that folks aren't familiar with. Renting some of those and go picking up, pallets of water. We try to get like a minimum of 6 each kind of journey, and making like 2 or 3 journeys every time we do that to get a kind of a bare minimum. To do a distribution, we want a bare minimum of like 15. And the response in the community actually has been damn good. I mean, almost every church and mosque and synagogue and temple and community organization are doing some form of water distribution right now. But, despite how beautiful it is, it's still not enough. There's still tons of people who are not either getting any water or not getting enough. So like, homeless folks, elderly, they're not getting much. And so the crisis is still pretty acute here for certain communities. And like, another thing is like, if you don't have a car, you also don't have access, right? Because if you're trying to carry 3 or 4 cases of water, you can't walk a couple of blocks, without hurting your back or wearing yourself out, carrying these big old cases in big old jugs of water. It's just not possible. So, we've been starting to do more individual, going to certain members in the community, particularly elderly folks that we know, going and doing like water drop-offs, right? So they don't have to leave their home, or if they don't have a family member, so that they can take care of. One thing I didn't describe in terms about the demographics, Jackson has an inverted bell curve, so folks understand, right? Very similar that you would see in like Africa or Latin America or parts of Asia. And what that means, we have a lot of young people, who are here, a lot of children, from zero, one couple of weeks old to about 18. And then we have a fair number of people who are like 60 and over. Folks between the ages of like 20 and 60, they're gone. Like they're not here. And what you have is their kids are here, living with their grandparents, right? They are off working wherever they can. Most of those people in that age, they are off somewhere else in the country trying to survive, and they send remittances back to their grandparents to support their kids. So it's very much like, quote unquote, a third world country in that regard, where a lot of, working age, able-bodied folks are someplace else trying to make a living because the wages are better or there are more jobs, right? And they're sending stuff back, and they a lot of people want their kids to say remain here than being in Houston or Atlanta or Chicago, or someplace like that. Because they could then roommate with other workers and keep the expenses on rent down, because most people don't own in those situations when they're in Houston. They don't have to do all the cost of living. Cost of living is lower here than it is elsewhere. So it's you can send more money back, get more bang for your buck, and then save money on like being able to send some stuff back. So that's why we're seeing like there's this gap. That's a critical gap to understand this crisis, because there are a lot of elderly folks who live in this community who live on fixed income. That's another thing to understand. Fixed income, and for those international audience who may not be familiar with it, the United States has we have Social Security, but it's nothing like you would have in Europe or damn near almost any place else. It's really piss poor, and it's really like pennies. And so, if the folks who worked in here, often, like down in the South, there are not that many unions, and the unions don't have that much power. So it's not like people got, these great union jobs like you might, and protections that come with that for retirement, like you might have in New York or Massachusetts or California or Illinois. That doesn't exist here. So the reality of a lot of the situation here is, like, if the water bills go up $20 more, and you're on fixed income and you're maybe getting $500 or $600 a month, which is what most people on fixed income get, that $20 means a couple of less meals, or one bill is not getting paid, or is getting paid late on a consistent basis, right? And you're kind of robbing people to pay Paul. Like, that's the real living conditions here. So even if they have water, like I was saying, if they have water in a grocery store, and now you have to pay for it, like at each point, as opposed to waiting for the end of the month or 2 or 3 months, to get a billing cycle that you can kind of defer payment off or save up money, or again, like, rob Peter to pay Paul, like, extend it until they damn near cut it off or something like that. You can't do that now. So a lot of people, they're dependent on going to the store, depending on the operation like ours for water. We can't deliver water every day. I mean, we're trying, but we can't. One, because there's just not enough around, right? For us to deal with. And then the other critical piece is we don't have any clear indication as to when the water is going to be restored, right? There's no clear, and I want folks to understand, we have two different problems with our water system, more than that, but two general ones. One, the pipes that we use are old, antiquated, and they're lead-based pipes, so they're already poisonous, particularly to children. Like you have lead poisoning develop, impairs your brain development and function. So that's one challenge we've had for a long time. And those pipes break quite often and come up with other contaminants or don't have enough pressure. That's one problem we have. The other problem, which this particular crisis is, the actual treatment facility is just broke. It doesn't work anymore, right? So it's not cleaning the water, right? It's not filtering the water. And it's going to cost billions of dollars to build a new one, a more adequate one. And the state government is refusing to give money to the city and has refused to give money to the city for generations. This is not something new. Jackson has had these kind of problems for a long time now, right? At this kind of acute level for literally 30 years. So this is a buildup of a problem. And, the federal government has earmarked money to be given, but to help deal with the repairs, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years. But that money goes to the state. It doesn't come directly to the city. And then the state redirects it and rediverts it into the suburb around Jackson, right? Not to Jackson. And most of the suburbs around Jackson, so you understand, are majority white, not majority Black. So there's a severe racial component to how all of this is playing out and who directly it's impacting and why. And that's the reality. And what I fear, just being clear, is that I think this is, remember I talked about the city shrinking. I hadn't come back to that, but it's shrinking for a number of different reasons. But this one I'm concerned, like if we don't get this fixed, you're going to have particularly a lot of kind of Black middle income, Black middle class folks who will probably opt to leave the city and leave it for good. Right? That is a serious threat that we have, and it's a rational choice that folks would be making if the city and the state are not able to guarantee, living in a place where you can't, have safe drinking water. And then there's all these laws about you can't collect rainwater, you can't do this, you can't do that, so it kind of makes you dependent upon their centralized system, which doesn't work. So some people have to start making rationalized choices like, okay, I have to, I got to go elsewhere in order to survive.
Yeah.
And so that's a serious problem that we're facing right now.
Yeah, it sounds really serious. So we're gonna play this video now, and actually while we're playing the video, we're gonna put information about how folks can support these efforts, because I know you've been sharing around a page how people can donate to support the kind of water efforts in particular, but I guess also like in general what you folks are doing. So the video, I think it's about 4 minutes, and then it will give people also a chance to see, like visually, like some of the things that you're doing. It's maybe a little bit out of date, the video. We've heard a little bit updates. So yeah, we'll continue after that with the questions that folks have been asking.
Black, overwhelmingly working class, overwhelmingly impoverished.
We're dealing with generations of mindset of slavery, what I call post-slavery syndrome. There are things that happen to us historically that has been passed through generations and it hasn't stopped.
The Trump phenomenon is catching many people throughout the world by storm. Mississippi's been living with that since the Redeemer Constitution government of the 1890s in one form or another.
Something has to be done, and I think Cooperation Jackson is a good vehicle to help with that.
What Cooperation Jackson is trying to do, preserve economic basis about collective resources, creating the commons, and creating new social relationships. That's the core essence of what our program is about.
With the Jackson Kush plan, written over a decade ago, one of the things that was initiated through that plan was the idea of taking back the means of production for the working class here in Jackson, heart of the Black Belt South.
What we're building here is something called a solidarity economy, systems where we're doing work that's meaningful to us, and where we can feel like we have ownership of our labor.
Let's focus on the transition.
Oh, okay.
If I fix something for you. You may not have to pay it. It means you could do some child care for me.
That you have something of value, whether you have no money at all or if you do have a job.
We have a Jackson Just Transition Plan, making Jackson a zero waste and zero emission city.
What really made the civil rights movement strong is that people really checked for each other. They really cared about one another. They ate together, they fought together, they cried together, they bled together. All of that is definitely going to be needed because that's how we have been able to survive and be able to be resilient through all of this.
How do we build our own economic base and build it on an anti-capitalist basis? We need to take the limited resource we have and then prioritize around need. People's Assembly existed before the plan. That's one thing everybody should know. That component we see as the lead component of the Jackson Kush plan, and then the other two pillars, you know, the independent electoral politics and the building the solidarity economy, are really, in some respects, we see them as outgrowths of that core component. The initial strategy was we would get in office and then we would change the policy infrastructure within the city that would then enable a vehicle like Cooperation Jackson to be born. If I had to do it all over again, I would have pushed more for us doing the solidarity economy work before getting into the electoral politics. And I think in all honesty, we did the electoral politics because that's what we knew how to do.
Black Jackson is income poor, but not experience poor. There's a lot of people with a lot of skills here.
We started having neighborhood meetings, and what we realized really quickly was that everybody could articulate where they would go if they had more money, if they, you know, had a better job. That's how we started like saying, okay, well, you know, if they can see what their ideal place would be, well, why not start organizing with that, saying like, look, you know, we can own this space and we can start to create what we can see.
It's about having that conversation first, then educating ourselves on what the issues are, and then coming to a conclusion collectively on how to solve these issues.
A lot of the unions forget that they once had co-ops internal to their own operation. One of the things that we're really trying to say, look, you're one of the bodies, working class entity that has tremendous amount of resources. You guys can serve as a bank for your own development if you so choose. Right, and investment in the development of your own members. If you just want to start there in their future, you can do your own just transition. There was a phrase I first heard in the 80s from the social movements in Venezuela, and it's recently coming back to the forefront of my mind and my imagination. We don't want to be the government, we want to govern.
Thank you for that very interesting video. We'll start with the questions from the participants. Kali, do you prefer if I ask one question by question? Sorry, I think you're muted.
Two at a time.
All right, two at a time. So yeah, the first two, how did you raise the money to carry out this strategy / get ownership of those properties? And what are the various methods you have used so far to resist attempts at co-optation, if any attempts have been made, as we've seen quite recently with these types of issues? The capitalistic co-optation is very real.
Yeah, good questions. I had spoke about like this iteration of the program in this time period. To really give you the full layout, this was about 50 years in its fulfillment. And I'm 50 years old, so things that my parents and grandparents kind of laid down that my generation kind of took up and then extended. So to really understand that like what success you see, you got to put it in a generational context. And so this is really an outgrowth for folks to look up with what's called the New African Independence Movement. And that's what the Jackson Kush plan is, kind of a strategy to kind of advance that particular movement and its aims and objectives. And I'm laying that out because I want folks to understand that it was in 2001. Remember, we didn't officially get started in 2014 as Cooperation Jackson. But a small group of folks within the Malcolm X grassroots movement made the decision in 2001, shortly after the World Trade already happened to members of our movement, some of whom are still released from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. One of them has a very active campaign, Mutulu Shakur. I want you to remember his name and look him up because he's currently, he's terminally ill, fighting cancer in prison, and they basically refuse to give him compassionate release. And so we've been pressing very hard on the prison boards and everybody to make, let him out. So he doesn't, transition on that side of, the walls of this society. But anyway, and from that decision in 2001, a group of us decided to get together and start pooling resources together. And we were with, each of us, we made a commitment that we would give $50 a month into a collective pool, and that money was going to be used to purchase land in Jackson, Mississippi. And so we started collecting resources to do that 13 years, basically, before we bought a piece of property. So a lot of patience, a lot of discipline, went into doing that. But it started with a vision, and it started with that kind of discipline. And along that time, we were monitoring property values. We were looking and assessing, what might be available and learning kind of, the tools of the trade, if you would. And we made our first kind of purchase actually before Cooperation Jackson was born in 2011, and then built up from there. So that's how we did that. Now, we've also been fortunate enough to have, a few athletes and entertainers who grew up in this community, who quote unquote made it, become professional players, particularly in the basketball arena. Knowing them from when they were kids, they've given back, and made some pretty substantial, contributions, not as investments in like something that they co-own or they're reaping a profit from, but like just understanding the politics, and we've been property in Mississippi is historically low, right? It's not a very different story if we try to do the same, for instance, in Atlanta.
I think we lost you for a little while. Could you just repeat that last point? I think we lost you.
I was saying that the other thing I want people to understand is that we've been able to buy as much property as we have because historically property values are low in Mississippi, and particularly in Jackson. If we tried to do the same thing in Atlanta, for instance, another southern city, but a much bigger city, a much more expensive city, instead of 44 properties, we would probably have 4. Like that's how vast and different the property values are. So some of this is determined by context as well as it is by strategy. The other piece around co-optation, we face that and we continuously face that in all kind of ways, big and small, just straight buyouts and people wanting to come, give money. Like we've had major foundations come and be like, oh, well, somebody offered us some years ago, like a $10 million grant. And it had all these conditions to it, and most folks are not going to, we should just take it and work around. Say, no. You wind up getting caught in legal obligations if you take these folks' money and then you don't do what they mandate you to do or have control over you doing. So it's better for us to leave that money alone and not be pressured into living by somebody else's conditions or standards or dictates, than take the easy route and take their money, to like live well or do better. It's like, yeah, we might, be able to pay ourselves more with that money, but that's other people telling us what to do. And what's the trade-off? In the long term, I want my kids and grandkids to be able to determine what the hell they want to do, how they want to do it, when they want to do it. But if we start off with a kind of a precedent where we're compromising, we're setting them up for similar conditions that just get passed on. So no, so we do it. It's a lot of struggle, and it has not always been pretty. Let me tell you, we've lost a number of people along the way. People who would rather go to, in my view, the quick and easy route rather than, engage in the struggle, be patient, be disciplined, live within the small, live within the immediate at times, but with the long-term vision, I'm making this sacrifice for this greater gain, but I might not see this gain for another 10 years, like literally. So, having a long-term intergenerational vision and being able to stick with it and stick to your guns and stick to your principles and engage a lot of political struggle, you're not going to avoid that. And in fact, you should always encourage it as a part of your accountability, processes and mechanisms, because anything democratic has to come with accountability mechanism. I hope folks understand that and grasp it. Like democracy is not, you just get to do whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it. Not if you're going to be in an actual relationship with human beings that you care about, who care about you, and you want to see their well-being. You got to take other people's feelings, interests, passions and desires into play and compromise, when and where. But there's some things that can't be compromised, and be clear about that. Like, I'm not going to compromise control over my body. It's just not happening. Like for me, like I'm not going to do that for anybody, anything, or any amount of money. So those level of principles you got to have is like, I can compromise with you a lot of things, certain things I can't compromise. So we may have to walk different paths. If that's the choice that you choose to make, I'm gonna make a different choice. But uphold the right for people to make choices. Like I'm not mad at per se that some people making certain choices. I understand, like some people, we had one person who recently left us, last year, and they had to. There was no way that where we are right now in our development, we can provide them with the resources that they need, because they have a mother who's they're the primary, care person for their mother. She's dying of cancer, right? And so they need money like right now that we couldn't afford. We don't have the level of resource. So they took a high-paying job. No, they're still a valuable part of our community and our circle. They don't work with us directly, but we all understood the choices that was being made and why it was being made. And it's a type of dynamic, because we're in open dialogue. Hey, the door, when in that situation transforms and you ever want to kind of come back and be in a relationship, the door is open. It's wide open. But these are, understanding, but also holding, at times, like understanding, but also holding principle. Like, this may not be the thing for you right now. Doesn't mean it won't be the thing for you forever. But be clear about that. You're going to have to engage in political struggle and uphold your principles if you're going to stay the course and not, sell out or compromise what you want to do.
Just to pick up on one thing you've mentioned, because it's the question's been asked by two different people. What type of accountability processes have you guys put in place?
Well, the first one is being clear about what people are proposing on doing. So it's open communication and try to be transparent communication on the front end, right? And so that way we kind of aware of what risks we might collectively be taking or what we're asked to do, and then have the ability to say no. Like, I want to stress that being a real critical one off the top, right? The more information that you have and can be provided on the front end for everybody to make decisions, that's the first, if you want to call it like accountability or defensive mechanism, that's the first one. After that, each co-op, there's a general cooperation in Jackson. So in terms of our struggle, there's a general cooperation in Jackson, which is the training mechanism, and then the federation, right? And those two work kind of hand in hand. But then there's the individual co-ops, and they also have their own independent decision-making processes within the federated way. So each one of them has their own kind of accountability mechanisms. And the things we run into most often, just so folks are clear and understand, where there's issues is about somebody not showing up for a shift or somebody not, following through on some of the work. And then how do you account for that? There's different ways that different co-ops deal with that. One group's, does like a deduction on like earnings, from that, which is collectively decided. They've already got a set policy to deal with that. Another group requires more volunteer hours for like a mistake or something that steps out, but then if there's major grievances or major issues of anything, which, we haven't dealt with some of the worst things that I've heard and experienced, there are protocols put in place. Luckily, we haven't had to deal with those, but, some of the issues that we have had to deal with, for instance, that required some major mediation was, just a couple of two instances where some folks stole some resources from the co-ops, right? And hoarded kind of some resources. And so there was some individual accountability mechanisms to totally determine how that happened, why that happened, and then set up protocols of like how many people can be on the account, what are the mechanisms by which resources can be drawn, how many people have to be aware of any money being spent. So different things like that got set up in each case that are a little bit different, but in two cases it wind up with people being removed from the co-op, being expelled for the co-op. And in one instance, there was a process of folks being charged with, they were removed from the co-op, but then were still charged with paying those resources back, which they did. And then a process set them for them to rejoin, right, over a gradual period of time, through kind of a reintegration through, a healing justice kind of framework. And they're back, they're working with folks. So there's different ways, and it's not one cookie cutter way to deal with anyway. I think what you have when you set up your accountability pieces, you want principles that you want to adhere to, but you also need to be flexible and recognizing not all situations are exactly the same. You got to take some context to understand, the particularities of each case, right? Which is not to make excuses for anybody, but not all cases are the same. And they don't always need to be treated exactly the same. The principles need to be upheld that people agree to, right? And they co-construct. But how you deal with the accountability, there's got to be just kind of this balance between the firmness of the principles, but then flexibility of the circumstances. And both of those things take into account to deal with the actual human beings who are in front of you that you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I'll move on to the next two questions, if it's all right with you. One of them is, what types of repression has Cooperation Jackson faced by federal, state, local governments, as well as non-state actors as a result of putting the Jackson Kush plan into place, thinking about the history of state and non-state sabotage of Black co-ops and Black autonomy? And the second question is, how do you enable people that are struggling most financially to engage in the cooperatives, given the potential risk and the time required to participate?
On the first one, we face all kind of threats. I would say the one that's the most kind of concerning of late is a larger one. Mississippi now has a Republican supermajority that controls the state legislature. And what that group, the supermajority, is taken to doing is passing a whole bunch of preventative laws, which say that, outline what we can't do and barring municipalities from doing it. And so one of the ones they did directly aimed at us was targeted around climate justice, like us kind of putting forth some proposals just to get the cities, get our municipality in particular, to commit to reducing kind of its emissions, by like, I think it was 10% within the course of a couple of years. And we made some suggestions on how they can do that based upon what we knew. And then this was stated on a radio program, which you would kind of think hardly nobody listens to, but apparently one of these state legislators listened to it religiously. He heard it, and then he came forward and put forward a proposal law that the state of Mississippi not adhere to any UN standards around climate change and not adjust any of its emissions. That damn thing got passed. So there's a law on the books from something that we said, which now prevents municipalities from adhering to certain standards, right? So we've kind of taken on that level of like, all right, certain things now we're just not going to talk about that much publicly, right? Particularly like local airwaves or news broadcasts, and instead let's come up with projects and programs that implement what we want, that we put our vision in practice first. So it's a program and an orientation of, do it first and ask for permission later, right? And it's very hard to demonstrate in practice, hey, we're doing this and it's working, it has these benefits for people in our community and benefits in general, for them to then come up with saying, well, no, you can't do that. Proof of concept has already been rendered. So that's kind of our orientation, but it just shows the level of attack is why I'm giving that orientation and what are some of the things we're having to do to adjust, right, to some of these attacks. But we're a very security-minded organization, very conscious of that. Self-defense is a core part of kind of what we do. And it's a core part of just the culture here of Black folks, particularly in Mississippi, just in general, just to know that. But we've been very mindful of that. Our environment kind of gives us a lot of protections. We're deep in the heart of the city where our community land trust is. It's a small place. It's, like I said, it's only 160,000 people. Our neighborhood is roughly about 45,000 of those people. And people know who each other are to a large extent around here. And so when strangers come in, it's very clear, you don't belong here. And we kind of get alerted very quickly, like there's somebody who don't belong, watch them, or we're watching them, and folks will call us up like, yo, we just saw some strange vehicle, over at at our main office, the cultural center. I get calls like that fairly regularly throughout the year, and it's been the FBI a couple of times, or it's been some, and folks, will call us, yo, it's people out there, and some of the stuff is just so obvious, it's like, don't nobody wear shoes like that around here, or don't nobody dress like that around here, like y'all could at least, come better with your game or something like that, but sometimes their point is to intimidate, so they're not going to change anyway. Depends on what their objective are. We've been infiltrated, we know that. Some folks have come in and done some disruption. I can't talk too much about that. And then we've had some safeguards to where we were able to protect certain things, but there was one case that was really bad. A lot of false accusations against one of the members, accusing her of being like a sexual predator. That we kind of had to deal with in some regards, total fabricated story. So, having people and having witnesses and having a culture, this is somebody we brought in to join our organization to provide a service. And then like very quickly kind of people like, something's not right. The actions and things aren't adding up. And then when it kind of got to a critical spot, some damage had been done, but we were kind of able to isolate it, based upon our practice and our culture and the nature of the community, right? So, but yeah, we've had plenty of threats. We we're a movement organization. We come out of the Black Liberation Movement. Our project is articulated as serving the Black Liberation Movement, right? Particularly a tendency of that movement. So we've started from day one anticipating being infiltrated, anticipating our activities being disrupted, very clearly. So we didn't walk into it naively, is my point, right? Or not anticipating or not feeling bad that folks have come and try to undermine us or see that as some obstacle or something to mope over. And it's like, no, the state is doing its job, we trying to disrupt it and end it, and they trying to do the same. So, they're going to do certain things that undermine us. It's up to us to be on our game to the greatest extent possible, be disciplined, be clear, and be principled, and work towards our own aims and objectives. The second question that was in there, I'm kind of refresh my memory.
Yeah, the second question was, how do you enable people that are struggling most financially to participate and engage in the cooperatives, considering their constraints of time, etc.?
We start by your participation is more valuable than money, right? Your labor is more valuable than coming in and making an investment. A lot of membership in Cooperation Jackson is only $50 a year. That's it. And it's low because that's hard for some people. And some people don't pay it, but what we say, okay, if you can't pay it, give us 5 hours of time on some projects, volunteering. And that'll totally just, it's not a write-off per se, but in essence, we're looking at it from a larger perspective of what their dollar represents is somebody else's stolen labor, basically, somebody else's stolen time. So you're just transferring that. So rather than give somebody else's kind of dead labor and dead time and energy, hey, just give us what you got, right? And then we'll count that, include that as part of, and we just kind of noted, hey, this person has done this many hours, membership dues, whatever, contribution noted. So there's a time banking mechanism that we work on that where we kind of monitor and track that, which enables folks who don't have those kind of liquid paper money to be able to participate on an equal basis with any and everybody else who might come in and can just drop $50 down. That's a core part of how we function and how we operate. And knowing that people have more time and they have resources around here, evaluating that time is very critical, very principal to what we do and how we kind of structure things to allow people to participate and engage at the level that they can. The other thing is just also building up systems that enable people to participate, particularly women and single women. We have a lot of single mothers in our community, some single fathers, but far more single mothers. And the only way they're going to be able to participate on any equal basis is if there's childcare. So that's a big portion of kind of our culture and operation. Typically, right now, if I could show you, there's just kind of kids everywhere, and a collective orientation that we are all tending to each other's children, but we rotate, like pods, this is your weekend, or this is your weekend to be primarily responsible and distribute that around very intentionally, around to make sure that there's gender balance and different experience. And it's not the same person or the same people always providing childcare. So there's collective, responsibility for all of that social reproductive work to make sure it's distributed and everybody takes it up. So that's we're setting up things like that, like how you have to create structures that enable people to fully participate and not assume that people just automatically can. That assumption is actually very classist in a lot of respects and very gendered in a lot of respects. So we try to counterbalance, and we're constantly learning in that regard. But one of our principles, our standard meeting principles, is that, if you come to our space, like right now, I wouldn't tell people to turn off the music and couldn't tell them to turn off the music, because it's a principle that we have it's going to be culture in our shit, right? Like we're going to have fun. Like that's the general principle. Like there's going to be, we're going to try to replicate joy and bring life and energy to what we do. So if I was to make a request, hey, turn that down, they would probably turn the damn thing up, right? And be like, us doing what we're doing and enjoying, you know, doing the work that we're doing is more important than you talking to whoever. That's how my people view it in the type of culture that's been created. And the same thing with kids. Like, look, if you think you're gonna have a meeting and the kids are not going to be a part of it, then you've come to the wrong place. Like we don't segregate the kids. That's the piece of what I'm saying. It's not like we have a space, like particularly in our culture space, there's a whole room that's just a kid's room. So they can go in there and go into their own world. There's toys and there's all that kind of stuff. But if they want to come out and just totally engage and be a part, that's an upholding principle that we have. So it's like, you know, if my kids could show up and just totally interrupt what we're doing, and sometimes people find that offensive, but like, no, within the culture, he knows or she knows, my son or my daughter know that if they need something, they can disrupt me, right? Because where the primary energy and attention is, it's like, okay, we're going to do that. We try to say, hey, I'm going to be working on this time, but then I'll shut this off. But they're, you know, sometimes they respect that, sometimes they don't, you know, depending what their needs, but that's a general piece. So it's like, you know, children are welcome in anything and everything that we do. And if, you know, you're thinking that they're going to be kind of seen and not heard, you've come to the wrong place. It might not be the place for you. It might not be the culture that you want to engage in. But that's how we enable it so that people can participate.
Thanks so much, Carly. I think this is a really good place to end. Well, I wish we could go on for actually like a couple more hours, but this is the time that we said that we would end. So yeah, thanks so much to Carly for giving us this time, especially in this time of like real crisis, and for Maj and all the other people that have been part of putting this on, and for everyone for coming. So we just wanted to talk through like a few little announcements at the end. So we've got these upcoming, this is the first in a whole series of what we're calling Conversations with Gamechangers. So now you can see the slide of the one today. They're actually on the second Saturday of every month at the same time. So if you manage to come to this one at this time, this is the same time that they should always, no, okay. The time's gonna change for some countries. So yeah, check it. That's why we put the UTC time on a lot of them. But it's gonna be the same time at UTC time, which is like GMT, which is currently not like most of the world. So yeah, 4 to 6 p.m. in British summertime we have currently. Next month it's with Aborigine, which is the Women's Economy Committees of Rojava of North and East Syria. So we're gonna speak to them from North and East Syria directly. Then the month after this, we have Grassroots Liberation. So they're organizing in the informal settlements in Nairobi in Kenya. And actually, I was really thinking while Carly was talking about the water crisis that all three, at least of the first, like the first half of the conversations basically are with people that have immense water crises in which they're struggling to like really build power in communities with these like intense problems. So then the one after this, we haven't announced yet, but we will. The one for December. It's in Latin America. And then the one in January is with Zamin Prapti Sangharsh Committee in the Punjab. So this is a self-organization of Dalit farmers. The Dalits are like the lowest in the caste system of India. And they're organizing for like several years already. We're very instrumental in the groundbreaking farming protests that you will have seen over the last couple of years in India. And then we're going to end in March with Guerrilla Translation. This is the only group in Europe. And we've chosen them because this whole project is basically a translation project. Like, how do we learn from each other? How do we spread the ideas? How do we spread the experiences of these really groundbreaking organizations and the things we're trying and learning from what we try? Like Carly really talked about this a lot today. Like, trying many things. Some of them work, some of them don't work, but you learn along the way. So these are all organizations which are trying new things, and of course, like learning from the old things as well. You know, being based in the context that they're in that geography, in that history, in that community. So finally, I'd encourage everyone to donate to support Cooperation Jackson's efforts. Oh yeah, and also there's a book coming out soon. Carly, do you want to say a few words about this book?
Yeah, so Jackson Rising, we put a book out called Jackson Rising 2016. And Jackson Rising Redux is kind of like an update where we've grown over the past years, you know, chronicle of some of our challenges, some of our successes. And we thought it was critical to kind of share some of this, you know, so folks learn from our mistakes and our successes. And it's coming out, I believe, in October now. It's supposed to be out last month. But we kind of messed that up. We added something to it that we felt was critical to be in it, and luckily PM Press, you know, obliged us. So we think it'll enrich the joint. But we encourage folks to check it out, and there'll be another piece called another book, hopefully coming out next year, called Build and Fight. That's more about some of our critical theory, you know, from the practice that we observed on, you know, how do you uphold developing kind of a whole comprehensive integrated system, as I was talking about earlier, that could position us to fight back. So, you know, be on the lookout for both of those.
Great, yeah, we'll do. And SE are planning to host also like a reading group around some of the texts in this book. So keep a lookout for that. You can follow us on social media. There is the link. Now there is really music. There is a link on our website, which maybe also Rory can post. Our website has links to all of our social media and to all of the upcoming events. So yeah, I think that's all from us. Thanks everyone for coming, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all, and pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much. It was so enriching. So feel really blessed.
All right. Take care, y'all.
Bye, everyone.